Hey, so this is Alan Tsao. I am doing another student question. This time it's for AP Calculus. And if you guys have any questions, you're welcome to send it to questions@bothellstemcoach.com. Please, no cheating, right? No quiz or test or things that go against academic integrity. But I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll pick one to do. I'll do one of these a week. If you're interested in more, you can check the description below. I do this kind of stuff for my students all the time, answering questions and explaining things. So let's take a look at this. This is a really interesting thing, one, especially when you're first learning about limits. I really like this kind of question here. So compute the limit as x approaches -1 of f of g of x. So one of these things is sometimes it's kind of tricky because a lot of people will, the common mistake to make is to say like, well, g of x, if I approach -1. So let's look at like the inside first. If I approach -1 of g of x, right, what am I going to do is I'm going to approach 1 here. Okay? Like it's going to approach 1. But then you say like, oh, but like, why are we going to approach it? Because as we're going from -1, the y value here is going to be 1. And the y value here is also going to be 1. So we're going to approach 1. But then people think, oh, well, then look at this side. If I approach 1 from the left and from the right, it's not going to match. This is a mismatch. And so it's very common to think it does not exist. And that is wrong in this case. When you have composition of functions, you have to be very careful and you actually have to evaluate it separately. So let's say we're going from the left and the right. This is sort of the key thing here. So let's look at what happens from the left and the right. If I go from the left, okay, what happens is I approach it from the left. It's not even that we're approaching 1. We are at 1 the entire time. Because if I do something like g of -1.1, what am I going to get? 1. G of -1.01, I'm going to also get 1. G of -1.000. As I get closer from the left, I am getting exactly 1. So it's definitely equal to 1 exactly. So then when we're going from the left, this is literally f of 1. Not as we approach 1, but actually what f of 1 is. And because this is a solid dot here, f of 1 is actually equal to 2. So that's coming from the left. Now let's look at it when we're coming from the right. X approaches -1 from the right. Again, we have to look at what happens here as we go from x approaches -1 from the right. What happens to the g of x? You are correct to note that it is 1, but here's what you want to note is that as x approaches -1 from the right, we're doing like g of -1, like -0.9, right? G of -0.9 is like, I don't know, like 0.9 or something like that. And g of -0.99 is equal to 0.99. This is like kind of like a y equals x, but just they're negative. We are getting closer to 1, okay? That is true, but are we approaching from the left or from the right? We're approaching from 1, although less than 1. So this is approaching 1 from the left, okay? Because the numbers here, the y values here, are smaller than 1, right? Okay, so that's really important to recognize. So then this is really the same as the limit as g of x approaches -1 from the right of f of g of x, right? Because we just showed you that this guy's -1, approaching 1, +1 from the left. And if I approach +1 from the left, what am I going to get? I'm also going to get 2 here, right? So what I did here was take that g of x and then make it approach 1 to the left because that's what we evaluated here. Because as I approach this, I'm approaching from 1, but less than 1, right? And so therefore this guy's 2. Now, so ultimately when we did it from the left for this composition, we got 2. We did it from the right, we got 2. So what is this limit? It's actually 2. It's not, does not exist, okay? So that's a really tricky and subtle point. A lot of people think, oh, there's a mismatch, right, on the graph, thus it doesn't exist. But you have to be very careful when you're doing composition of functions. It can be a little tricky as to what's going to happen with those limits. So if you like more of that, send in a question. If you have a question, go and send it in the questions at bothellstemcoach.com. I'll get it. I'll choose one every week to do. And yeah, I hope you found this helpful.